Welcome to our continuing series, We the People, and it is with the marking of 10 years of the Constitution that we are talking to people who have walked this journey and have even been part of the implementation of the very same law that we live by, or at least supposed to. And now we are pleased to be hosting Professor Githu Muigai, the former Attorney General, the first actually under this Constitution. And on the 27th, take us back then, on the 27th of August 2010, where were you and what vision did you have for Kenya's future in terms of the Constitution that we were introducing?
It was actually a wonderful, wonderful day. I remember it very clearly. I had been part of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, and so we had worked on the original draft that ended up with the committee of experts. My predecessor, Amos Wako, is the one who had the privilege of having the document signed by President Kibaki. And it was a very, very, very momentous occasion. Very well attended. I was watching it from home because I thought it would be quite a demanding day. But I did enjoy it very, very much. Little then did I know that I was going to be involved much later in its implementation.
What vision did you have, not quite as an outsider because you were involved in, the formulation of it, the brainchild, some would say, but what vision did you have then?
Well, you see, the Constitution had been amended several times since 1964. In fact, the First Amendment was on the first anniversary of independence. The First Amendment, which transformed Kenya into a republic. That was the First Amendment. And from that First Amendment, the Constitution was amended around about 27 times by the time we enacted the new one. In fact, as an academic, I spent much of my career studying the amendments and the amendment process, and I wrote a PhD thesis on that, and just about to publish the book on it. So for me, it's been a labor of love, watching how the Constitution has grown and how in many, many situations it succeeded in securing some gains. Yes. And disappointingly sometimes it's been unable to resolve some of our historical problems.
Right. And in that we'll get to, especially with the land reforms, a big issue for this nation. In the preamble of the Constitution, we have the first few words, we the people.
Yes. What? And I must take some, with all due modesty, I must take a little credit for being part of the craft, being among the couple of people who crafted the preamble.
Wow. And so being that, having played that role, what does it really mean in terms of the ideals of this Constitution and what it espouses, or at least what it aspires to attain?
I think one of the most enduring concerns, as at the time we were getting to bombers, was whether we would be able to deliver a constitutional order that would, that would carry the state in a stable way that would enable prosperity and independence and freedoms of people of another generation. Our parents had been extremely excited by the Independence Constitution because for them it brought independence, it abolished the calabar, it opened huge opportunities to be entrepreneurs, to be public servants, and so on. I saw this as an opportunity for another generation to reinvent Kenya. The project that we call Kenya, creating greater cohesion, greater prosperity, bringing pockets of our societies that had been left behind into the mainstream, and so on and so forth. It was a very exciting project to be involved in.
Let's see if it has been as exciting now that you became the AG, the first AG, under this very law that you were part of crafting. How was that experience for you, the implementation of the same? It's one thing being part of the making and building, but now implementing it from paper to reality.
It was very difficult, very, very difficult. And for several reasons. First of all, you must remember, the Constitution represents at any given time a compromise. Critics think of it as a perfect, that you can achieve perfection. The truth is you can't. When I was a student and when I became a teacher of constitutional law, I used to attack the independence constitution on the basis that, it was a patchwork that sought to accommodate everybody. I was very shocked to arrive at Bomas and to arrive at Sharia House and to discover you will never have a constitution unless it's a patchwork representing compromises. For example, when we drafted the original in Bomas, there were no counties over 47 counties. In fact, what we envisaged at the time is that we would devolve into the old provinces.
Yes.
And there were very, very serious, there was a lot of pushback on that issue. People said, you are introducing Majimbo. Now, Majimbo was such a hot potato of the independent constitution. And it continued to dominate, the discourse.
Yes, in fact, it re-emerged at around that time.
Yeah. And that's why we then went to this district and ended up with 47 counties. I have my own views about whether that was a good or bad idea.
10 years now, how would you term, perhaps, let's say even on a scale of 1 to 10, coincidentally, the implementation of this constitution and its performance?
I think we have done reasonably well. I think in the area of personal human rights, in terms of the recognition of the rights of persons and the political space, the freedom of thought, freedom of religion, the civil space, I think we've done very well. There are very few democracies on this continent that have achieved what we have achieved, in my opinion. And that's not to try and gloss over some of the problems we are still experiencing in that space. But I think we've done very, very well. I would give us 7.5 out of 10 on that area.
So the 2.5, where have we?
It's a work in progress. Okay. Because you see, even when we have all this really very progressive sort of jurisprudence coming out of the courts and so on, we still have a problem with you have a police force that has to a police service that has to internalize this sort of culture. You have a prison service. You have other So we are still not there, but I do hope in my lifetime that we will get there.
When it was coming to reality in terms of the promulgation, and there was this hope, and the country was pregnant with hope of deliverance from what has held us captive all these years. And there seems to be an expectation that this will be the panacea of all our problems. What do you say to the people who had this hope of the Constitution?
That is an amazing insight that you have, because as a matter of fact, this is the most dominant theme in our constitutional history. The political actors have always, presented the Constitution as the panacea to all the ills that are obtaining at the time the changes are being made. But the truth is, the Constitution operates within a political context. And you have to have a political culture that makes it possible for the Constitution to thrive. Even a very good Constitution, okay, if you look at the United States today, you cannot recognize the behavior of for lack of a better word, the behavior of government in the United States today under the current administration and under previous administration. And the Constitution hasn't changed. So politics can and does affect very fundamentally how the constitutional culture will evolve. To my mind, therefore, no, writing a good constitution, formulating good constitutional principles is important, but developing a culture of constitutionalism, developing a progressive politics is very important. Because, for example, if you don't have a tolerant political culture, no matter what the Constitution says, that politics can compromise, the output of the Constitution itself. Okay, so I am a great believer in the Constitution. I have spent my entire adult life trying to make my own little contribution, but I'm old enough to know that that is not enough. Yes. We need to do more to develop, to deepen the culture of democracy, the culture of dialogue, the culture of toleration, and so on and so forth.
You've mentioned earlier the 2.5 work in progress that we're lagging in and performing to 100%, if we may. And we can't say any republic operates at 100%, but ideally, with what we would hope, and what you've just said, it works, the Constitution works within a political culture and framework. Would you attribute the failure to reach 10 out of 10 to some of the political interests?
First of all, you must recall that Kenya comes to independence as a monolithic political structure that is largely undemocratic. The colonial order is not democratic, yeah, and has no respect for even the most basic human rights. The mass incarcerations of our people during the emergency, the Calabar, yeah, the deprivation of people's lands to create the White Islands. We come from a period of very, very oppressive, autocratic colonial order. Then we got to Lancaster, and we have a new constitution, and it's called the Independence Constitution of Kenya. And suddenly, we are supposed to create democracy, national unity, national harmony, respect for each other's religions and cultures. We are supposed to become a civic-minded people who are keen to support, the public space and so on. Mm-hmm. So there is a sense in which the constitutional problems that we inherited from the colonial state were predictable. For example, you can imagine the whole question of national unity, which even today is a very fundamental question, integrating Kenya, the nation state. It's a work in progress. There are many, many people in many parts of this country who ask you, how is Kenya?
Yes, yeah? Yes.
And it is more than a rhetorical question. It's that it's taken a long time to integrate and create that political and constitutional order. And there are many other areas, you know, in the distribution of resources. The truth is that the colonial order itself rewarded areas that were producing what was important for the colonial economy. So, and therefore you would find roads, you'd find the railway, you'd find whatever in the areas that were considered productive to the colonial economy. To reverse that process and begin to take development, to take, to other, what were called outlying districts, it's a huge problem. One of the areas I think we have not sufficiently recognized as a success area is devolution. I myself, had it been up to me, we would have devolved, as I said earlier, to bigger entities. Maybe we would have about 12 devolved entities, which, in my view, would have been more economically viable. But we have finally taken resources from the center to the people in a way, because to the people's representatives in the counties, and that's been a success. It's not been an unqualified success, but it's been a success.
We'll get to the issues that can qualify, especially today, and whether or not it has been a manifestation of success. But let's go back to one of the highlights, I'm sure it was, in your term as the AG, and this was the annulment of the presidential election in 2017. And what did it mean to the rule of law, or at least attempt to attain the rule of law, for this to have happened in Kenya?
Well, I must be quite honest with you. I did not think that that was a good decision. On the law, and I'll come to that in a moment, I have always understood the law on elections in the British Commonwealth to be that a court of law would disturb the outcome of an election where it is demonstrated with evidence, serious evidence, that whatever irregularities are complained of had the result of impacting the final outcome. To my mind, there were irregularities that were demonstrated, and these are in elections globally, but they were of such minor, such pedantic, that they didn't affect the outcome, in my opinion. Yeah. I argued that before the court, and the court did not agree with that. They annulled the election. There is a sense in which, as far as maybe academics are concerned, the media and other observers of democracies are concerned, would say it then is a good thing if in a country you can even annul the ultimate election. It means that the rule of law has found a footing, and I sympathize with that view, and I think that in Malawi they followed the Kenyan case, and however, the general rule notwithstanding, that rule did not apply in the election we held here, in my opinion. Yes. And when you read my book, you will find that I have expounded on that argument.
So just for those who haven't and might be getting to reading it, in your view, for the rule of law, because you've mentioned those who've seen it as a gain for Kenya as a democracy, that happened in our history. But in terms of the rule of law, this is somewhat a black spot.
No. I'm saying that as a matter of a general constitutional principle, it is useful that all institutions in a democracy should come under the scrutiny of the courts and therefore of the rule of law. So I have no problem with that. And to the extent that the Supreme Court in its wisdom decided that this was a case that they felt met the threshold for annulment, I leave that to them and to the memoirs that they will write. All I'm saying that personally, as a constitutional lawyer, as a historian, as a person involved in the process of writing the Constitution and the process of implementing it, this was a wrong decision.
To another decision that followed soon after. That was a parallel swearing in of Raila Odinga as the people's president. How close to the precipice were we as a democracy, and what effect did it have, or would I say precedent did this set for the rule of law?
Well, you will recall at the time that I pronounced myself in very strong language, maybe with hindsight. I did point out that notwithstanding any grievance that any person may have, in the Republic of Kenya, there is only one central source of authority, and to set yourself as an alternative source is contrary to the law and is punishable as such. I took a lot of heat at the time for that pronouncement. I stand by it today. I am sure that historians will judge that I was right on that point. It is a slippery path, which if you went down, the country may never come back. You would have disputed elections, and each time you would hear that the loser has retreated to Mount Kenya and declared himself, Then another loser has retreated to the lake and declared, another one to northern frontier.
Yeah.
It cannot be a good thing.
Some sort of anarchy.
It would breed some anarchy. And that's why, even if we don't agree with the court process is the only one that can legitimately produce an outcome that everybody can live with. Yeah.
And in terms of what you've just described here, the state that we would have put ourselves in, how close were we to the edge then?
Very close. Very close.
All right. During your tenure as well as Attorney General, there was the issue of the three arms of the government, still is, and the relationship therein. How would you describe it back then? And how would you describe in terms of whether it has deteriorated now, especially between judiciary and the executive?
In the first part of my tenure, we were in the coalition government, and that made life much easier in terms of managing the state, because then there was the political class had common cause, and therefore there was less friction. And in fact, when we started off the first constitutional implementation laws that we brought to Parliament, we were able to move quite fast because we had consensus. When we're in the first republic after the constitution, then of course we had gone into what some of you in the media call the winner takes it all. The winner, and so we had a winner and a loser, and that complicated politics. And as we said earlier, if the politics is complicated, it's very difficult to get the constitutional order functioning smoothly. So we got into much more difficult territory there. Now, as far as the judiciary was concerned, I think the judiciary also was beginning to assert itself as a new judiciary with a new constitutional order, with new personnel, really, because the Supreme Court was a new court, totally new court. There were many people who came from private practice, from academia, from whatever. So there was a kind of a new judicial culture. I didn't see it as necessarily creating a conflict with us in the executive, but it did create a culture where an executive that wasn't quite used to being questioned on every decision, was taken by surprise.
Right. And to be specific on some of the issues that somewhat are a thorn in the flesh for the current judiciary, the appointment of the judges, and there has been a delay, and so you would say even the Supreme Court has been walking with a limp and perhaps almost on crutches, needing crutches very soon. How does that come off in terms of the cooperation between the judiciary and the executive?
You see, we have the constitutional provisions on the appointment of judges were not very elegantly drafted. And therefore, the idea that an independent judicial service commission would nominate judges and the president would automatically appoint them is an argument made by one group. Then there is another group that says, but how does that then make sense if you are the appointing authority and you have a list and you come across information or material information? How then would you do that? That would be a dereliction of the responsibility of maintaining fidelity to the rule of law. So, the great tragedies of history don't happen when wrong meets wrong. They happen when right meets right. So this is again something that, in my opinion, in my tenure we had a problem like that. We negotiated it. We negotiated it with the judiciary, the executive. We sat down and went over and over the various issues, and finally we overcame it, and the judges were sworn in. I'm very optimistic.
As the AG then, especially right after the annulment of the presidential election 2017, this is still to the relationship between the judiciary and the executive, there was the word of revisiting. And it seems it echoes throughout now the leadership of the current CJ, who has expressed frustration over time. And his time is almost out in January of next year. As a legal advisor to the president, do you regret those words? If you had an opportunity, would you have asked him to kind of take back those words?
I can't comment on that. That's not within my, that's outside my.
But in a sense, as the AG then, do you feel it gave a wrong impression or perception out there as to how judiciary will be allowed to work?
I think we need to recognize that even the judiciary itself functions within the political context, the political and social context of Kenya. And I think that to the extent that the Kenyan public or the Kenyan politicians or Kenyan media says the judiciary is not working well and we need to make changes to it, I wouldn't think that that is, I don't think it's a very cataclysmic observation. Any more than we say every day. In fact, you guys in the media say every day, Parliament is not functioning Parliament is whatever. Parliament must be reformed. We must reform everything. We must reform Parliament. We must reform the judiciary. We must reform the executive. So I'm not very worried about that.
Okay. And to the two-thirds gender principle, something that is quite close to you, and even in your tenure, you really try to push for it. But to date, it has not been put in place or implemented as should be as a constitutional requirement. What do you make of all this filibustering amidst the political ilk and the class?
I think myself that, again, we go back to political culture, social culture. I think the Constitutional Review Commission and the Committee of Experts were ahead of their times. I don't think that in this country there is sufficient political and social consensus on this point, yeah, that you require, because as you know, I think we wrote more than, when I was there, we wrote more than 4 different constitutional bills. You will remember, as Attorney General, I went to the Supreme Court to ask the Supreme Court, please help us. You know, interpret this and tell us, do we need this law before the next election? Because if we do, then we have to hurry in the Constitution. The Supreme Court, in its wisdom, and I agreed with it at that time, because you don't want to play chess with the country. We were very close to the election date. The Supreme Court said, no, 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 no. You have time. You can do it later, but you do need to do it. So we went into the election, and a new parliament came, and we started again, bill after bill after bill, and we never got a consensus around it. By the time I left government, I had myself started thinking that we need to change tact. And I was thinking that maybe we were attacking the wrong end of the problem. We wanted to change the Constitution. And I thought, no, no, no. Maybe what we need to do is to create an Article 100 legislation on equality and so on. Then transfer the problem to political parties. Say, look, political parties, by the time you come, if you in all your dominant whatever, you have to have a woman and a man on the ballot. So it is the problem of ODM. It is the problem of WIPA. It is the problem of so on and so forth. All the political parties to place women on their candidates list.
So beyond political will, what will it take to make it work? You've said change of tact and approach of implementation of the same, but you've also mentioned a reality check of perhaps we were ahead of our time. But it is a good idea.
It is an excellent
still, idea. Is it its time now in your reading?
I believe myself that every institution, every public institution should reflect the face of the nation. If, for example, half our population are women, ipso facto, our institutions should reflect that. If half our people are Christians or Muslims or Hindu or whatever, that should be reflected as well. If half our people are youth, 3/4 are youth, that should be reflected. So on that issue, I've never had any doubt that we need to do more. But I want to put this caveat because I think it's important, and we must address each other with honesty and candor. And it is this. The public needs to see the value of having women in public positions. They need to see that women bring value. If you look at the way the virus has been fought globally, we have been able to see that women leaders bring value. And that is a very important study for our children, for everybody. We learn that way. Even here, I do not want to criticize, but the public wants to see that those women already in public life, those already elected to parliament, are bringing new ethical standards, new moral standards, new professional standards and so on. And then the case will be won much, much more easily.
So far, do you think they're getting a fair judgment for the few who are in leadership?
I think they are trying their best, but I think...
But a fair judgment from the public in terms of their credentials and their performance?
I think the public is a good judge because the public reacts to what is important for them. They want to see things that are important for them. And that's why all politics is local. The guy the guy out in Dumberi he wants to hear something about how his life is being changed where he is. Okay? And therefore, we need to revisit this issue, help profile the female leadership better and support them better, and therefore be able to make this cultural shift in the minds of our voting public.
You've mentioned the cultural shift. Is it our undoing then that we are a male-dominated culture, and that's why we have to, you mentioned, the shift?
You are very perceptive about this with respect, because that's where we started. You remember we said you can write a constitution in whatever language you want, create whatever institution you want. If the culture undermines that, you can't achieve it. You understand? That is why we need a culture, political, social, and otherwise, that buys into the fundamentals of the Constitution. And that is one area. On this gender question, I think that the culture is pushing back against the Constitution.
All right. And I see the clouds are heavy above us, and before the rains start beating us, would you say, you've mentioned a bit, there's a point where the rain started beating us in terms of implementing devolution as a very key part of this constitution. And when did that particular downpour start?
I think that there is a sense in which when the governors were first elected they began to perceive of their role as antagonistic to the central government. And there is what I call the lost years. The lost years. And these are the years in which, instead of the governors working with the executive of the national, there was more or less antagonistic push and pull. And I remember being in Parliament, and all I could hear from some of my colleagues there is, there are people here who want to kill devolution. And I would stand up and ask, my friends, how will it be killed if it is so deeply entrenched in the Constitution? So we wasted we wasted years that we could have been working together. Today, I think, I see the executive and the council of governors sitting together. Look at this issue of the virus. I think that there is perfect harmony there. Everybody saying, look, you are in charge of health, are you? Okay. Let us consult as to how we get you the money to help you to be prepared. That's the argument we should have been having from day one. But it didn't happen like that. There was a conflict.
Right. And in aspects of more particular, and you've mentioned the key issue of the antagonistic view of an attitude of the governors to the national government. In terms of the revenue allocation, accountability, devolved functions, which we've talked about, like health, where is the disconnect between implementing what is in the Constitution and also making sure that it's to the letter and the spirit of the law?
Well, I think first of all, you have to remember that the county government was hoisted on the remnants of county councils, which were very, very, very weak, extremely weak. The majority of them, maybe except Nairobi, Mombasa, maybe a few others, they were very, very weak governance structures and very, very weak accountability structures. So, notwithstanding that some of the governors have done a really great job trying to create from scratch, this structures, you can still see the weakness in the architecture of county government.
But someone might say the architecture, or at least the blueprint, is provided in the Constitution as to how the foundation for each.
But you then have to populate it with human beings who then, it's a software, hardware argument. Yes. The hardware is there, and the software is a real challenge.
So it's something that we still need to work on
it. By the way, I think that, in my opinion, the county governments are very, they're too big. They're too big. In fact, the county government demonstrates the crisis with the gender rule as well. Because if they are not elected, then you nominate until you top up to the right. And so we do need the software and the hardware harmonized.
Okay. Almost a decade on, the push for more reforms is gaining momentum. And there are experts who are saying, we actually don't need any more reforms. We could work with what we have. What is your recommendation to this end? And do you feel that always reforming, you've mentioned since 64, the attempts we've tried. Do you think reforming is the answer, or should we just stick with what we have? And
I think reforms are, it's not a bad thing, actually. 10 years after we enacted the Constitution, to take a serious, hard look at what has worked, what hasn't worked, and why what worked, why what didn't work, and what we ought to do about it. I think that that's a good discussion, that's a good dialogue. It's something that I personally would welcome. But it does require also to be done in a way that builds on the achievements that we have, so I would not say that don't touch anything, everything is perfect, because it's not. Right. We know many things that haven't worked the way we envisaged, and we would want to tighten the nuts a little bit around them.
Yeah, at the same time, don't trash what we have.
Well, but you can't trash. We have a good constitutional order. In fact, as an academic, I don't see the new constitution as wholly as a whole radical departure. No, because it also builds on our historical constitutional experience. So Kenya has had a constitution since 1963. Only that there have been several versions, but it's the same constitutional order. You understand what I mean by that, for example? Yeah, it's the same constitutional order.
Mm-hmm. And when you look ahead to the years, perhaps even 10 more years to come, what's the future of Kenya that you see with our current situation?
What concerns me the most is national unity and integration. National unity and integration. we must spend the next 10 years integrating and harmonizing the various parts of Kenya and the various faces so that Kenya has, because we are a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, many other things society. We can never wish that away. And we cannot pretend that if you have a constitution, it has created harmony. Harmony you have to work on. You have to work on. Yeah, and that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see more shared prosperity. Whatever Kenya, when we develop, when we advance, I'd like to see this, the benefit of this advancement being shared across.
All right, let me cut you short and just ask, your exit wasn't quite clear. What were the circumstances around it? You left 6.5 years after as AG. What led to this, really?
It was a very mutual parting with my my bosses. It was very well discussed over a long period of time. As you recall, we had a press conference about it. The president said some very complimentary things about so there was no. It was something that had been discussed.
No infighting, being overruled?
Not at all, not at all. We worked very well.
All right. And could we hope to see you in public office shortly? Soon?
I hope not. I was educated on public money.
Yes.
I have paid my debt.
So you'll keep teaching?
I'll keep teaching now.
Professor Githu Muigai, thank you for your time, and just in cue as the rain start hitting us here, but thank you for giving us your time, and our series, We the People, continues into the week of celebrating 10 years of the Constitution.